I'm 32 years old and recently took a much-needed vacation on a luxury cruise liner. The ship was a marvel of modern engineering, its vast expanse and elegant design making it a floating paradise. I was eager to escape the daily grind and immerse myself in relaxation. I had booked a cabin with a balcony, hoping to enjoy unobstructed ocean views and tranquil moments. My neighbor in the adjacent cabin was an elderly woman, a figure who seemed almost ethereal amidst the ship's luxury. She was quiet and polite, her demeanor reserved but pleasant. We exchanged pleasantries a few times, and she mentioned that she was traveling alone. Her solitude seemed to match the serene aura she carried. One evening after a day filled with exhilarating activities, I was unwinding on my balcony. The sun had set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and I was mesmerized by the endless expanse of the ocean. I noticed the woman next door also out on her balcony. She was standing still, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. Her stillness struck me as odd, almost as if she were in a trance. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I assumed perhaps she hadn't heard me over the gentle hum of the ship, so I shrugged it off and returned inside, dismissing the moment as a quirk of isolation. Exhausted from the day's adventures, I soon fell into a deep sleep. Later that night, I was abruptly woken by strange noises emanating from her cabin. The sounds were muffled, but I could make out what seemed like voices and shuffling noises, as if someone were moving furniture around. It struck me as peculiar, especially considering she had mentioned traveling alone. The noises persisted intermittently, but I was too tired to investigate. The following morning, I was puzzled to find that the woman had not shown up for breakfast. It was unusual, as she had seemed to be a regular at meals. I inquired with a crew member about her whereabouts. They looked at me with confusion and said there was no elderly woman staying in that cabin. I was insistent, explaining that I had seen and spoken to her. They checked their records and confirmed that the cabin was indeed booked, but there was no record of anyone matching her description. My confusion deepened as I struggled to reconcile what I had experienced. Later that day, a maintenance worker arrived to inspect the cabin next door. I watched with growing apprehension as they opened the door. The room was empty, its furnishings covered in dust as though it had been unused for years. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered the unsettling noises from the night before. That night, the disturbances resumed, now more intense and distressing. The faint whispers seemed to come from just beyond the door, mingling with the shuffling sounds. Summoning all my courage, I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The whispers grew louder, pressing against the door as though desperate to escape. The door creaked open slightly, revealing a shadowy figure standing just inside. It resembled the woman I had seen earlier, but her appearance was now ghostly and hollow. Her eyes were dark voids, and her mouth moved as if attempting to speak, but no sound emerged. Panicking, I fled to my cabin, locking the door behind me. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize what I had seen, but the encounter left me shaken. The following day, I switched to another cabin on a different deck, unable to shake the sense of dread associated with the previous one. Before leaving the ship, I overheard crew members discussing the cabin. They mentioned it had been sealed off due to a previous passenger, a woman who had passed away under mysterious circumstances. The description they provided matched my spectral neighbor. The experience remains a haunting mystery. I can't explain what I saw or heard, but the memory lingers vividly. The ghostly figure of the woman and the eerie disturbances continue to haunt me, leaving me with an unsettling sense of the unexplained. I'm 27, and this was my first cruise. I was traveling with friends, eager for a week of relaxation and adventure. We had secured a cabin on the lower decks, close to the waterline, which was perfect for our plans. The initial days were everything we had hoped for: sunny skies, sumptuous food, and a plethora of entertainment. One night, after a day spent lounging by the ship's pool and enjoying the vibrant atmosphere, we decided to retire early. I was the last to fall asleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of the ship. Around 3 a.m., a sudden jarring thump against our cabin wall jolted me awake. My friends remained sound asleep, and I decided to investigate. I peered through the small porthole, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, I thought I saw a fleeting shadow move across the water. It vanished almost instantly, leaving me with a sense of unease. I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination and returned to bed. The next morning, I mentioned the noise to my friends. They brushed it off, attributing it to the ship's creaking. However, that night, the noise returned, louder and more persistent. It sounded as if something was relentlessly banging against the hull. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, we decided to explore the lower decks. As we wandered the dimly lit corridors, we came across an old maintenance door that was slightly ajar. Inside, we discovered a storage area filled with old equipment and spare parts. But the most unsettling find was a life-size mannequin, dressed in an old sailor's uniform, standing in a corner facing the wall. The mannequin's lifeless eyes seemed to follow us as we quickly exited the area. Back in our cabin, the feeling of being watched intensified. That night, the knocking grew frantic, accompanied by mournful cries that seemed to pierce the darkness. Terrified, we stayed awake, too frightened to sleep. The noises persisted for hours, finally tapering off around dawn. The next day, we sought an explanation from the crew about the storage room. They appeared surprised and somewhat troubled. The crew explained that the storage room had been sealed off for years. They recounted a story about a crew member who had disappeared during a storm, only to be found drowned near the ship. The mannequin was rumored to be a tribute to him, though no one would confirm its origin. That night, the noises resumed, accompanied by the eerie sound of water sloshing against the hull. We peered through the porthole and saw a figure in the water, its hand seemingly pressed against the glass as if trying to get in. We screamed, and the figure vanished, leaving only the dark, empty sea. We moved to a different cabin and avoided the lower decks for the rest of the voyage. The crew reassured us it was merely the ship's noises, but we knew something more sinister was at play. The experience was unforgettable, and to this day, I shiver at the memory of the ghostly figure and the relentless knocking. I'm 29 and work as a freelance photographer. Last summer, I was hired to document a week-long cruise, a dream assignment, free travel, excellent food, and the chance to meet intriguing people. My cabin was situated in a quieter part of the ship, ideal for editing photos and finding some peace. One evening, while exploring the less traveled parts of the ship, I stumbled upon an unmarked door at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. My curiosity piqued. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it opened. Inside was an old, unused cabin, its furnishings coated in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. The room seemed to have been untouched for years. I took a few photos, intrigued by the potential story behind the abandoned space. Later that night, while reviewing the photos in my cabin, I noticed something peculiar. In one of the images, a reflection in the dusty mirror showed a woman standing behind me. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her face pale and her eyes dark. I hadn't seen anyone else in the room when I took the photo. The next night, I was awakened by soft footsteps outside my cabin door. They seemed to pause directly outside, then move away, only to return moments later. I opened the door, but the hallway was empty. This eerie pattern repeated several times, leaving me increasingly unsettled. Determined to find an explanation, I revisited the old cabin. This time, the air felt unnervingly cold, and the door to the bathroom was ajar. Inside, the mirror was fogged up, as though someone had just taken a hot shower. Despite the freezing temperature of the room, as I wiped the condensation away, I saw the same woman from the photo standing behind me. She whispered something inaudible before vanishing into thin air. Terrified, I reported my experiences to the ship's staff. Their concern was palpable as they informed me that the cabin had been sealed off for decades. It had once been occupied by a woman who had mysteriously disappeared, her body never found. Some believed she had never left the ship and was still searching for something or someone. That night, the footsteps returned, accompanied by soft weeping. The sound seemed to be coming from within my cabin, growing louder and more distressing. I turned on all the lights and sat up, too frightened to sleep. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and I saw the outline of the woman standing at the foot of my bed. Her sorrowful eyes locked onto mine before she slowly faded away. The next morning, I left the ship, unwilling to spend another night. I shared the photos with the crew, who confirmed the haunted history of the cabin. The woman was believed to be a passenger who vanished under mysterious circumstances, and her ghostly sightings were not uncommon. I've shown the photos to others, and while some are skeptical, those who recognize the ship's layout confirm the existence of the forgotten room. The eerie memory of that abandoned cabin and the ghostly woman lingers with me, a chilling reminder of the haunting experiences